Okay guys, you'll notice that I have the front bumper off the car. The reason I took the bumper off is because I'm doing two mods. Is the intercooler for the LSA Supercharger that I'm putting in. As you can see, this intercooler doesn't require you to move anything. The stock transcooler is in the right place. The AC condenser is in the right place. The windshield washer tank is also in the right place. It's right behind here. The only thing that I did was I talked to the owner of STG Motorsports, Greg Conover, through Facebook. He basically said you could either run the bumper cover support or you can not run it. I decided to run it just because I don't want the bumper to be flexing and moving around. And for you to get the bumper cover support to work, so what you need to do is cut and trim to clear the intercooler. So as you can see, I cut about 1 inch deep and the whole width of the intercooler, and then you're good. Now this part, you have to cut this complete off because there's no way for this stock support bracket to fit with the intercooler, with the radiator hoses going into the intercooler. So what I did was I just took a piece of diamond plate steel, bent it, I think it's like 7 inches long total, bent it 1 inch, bent it 90 degrees so that you're facing, so it was flat, it's going up and then down. So it's 1 inch flat and then 3 inches horizontal and then it's 3 inches flat again. As for the holes, I drilled the top one. That just is a stock support hole that also holds in the intercooler. And I also drilled 2 more holes, and then I used some rivets to support the plastic to the steel. Now I probably could have used a bolt through here, but I have rivets. I have a rivet gun, so I just riveted, and it's not going to go anywhere. So some people don't run it. I decided just to run it. You know, I don't want this, like I said, I don't want the bumper flopping around, so, but yeah. And then I ran the hoses. This is a 3/4 inch radiator hose. I got it from AutoZone. And I ran one down through underneath the lower radiator hose, underneath the transmission lines, and then I'm gonna put my pump somewhere down here. I'm thinking there's a hole right here. There's a hole right here I'm going to point to. I'm probably going to tap that and put the stock, the CTS-V pump here. So that'll go through the side, and then the top, I'll have it come up past the radiator fan, and I'll have that go into the coolant manifold from on top of the intercooler. Now the other hose I ran, so that was the bottom one going to the pump. The top one, this one's just like sitting here loose for now, but that's eventually gonna plug into this Cobalt SS. That's actually what that's from. That's from a Chevy Cobalt, but they used it on the CTS-Vs. They may have used it on the ZL1s. I'm not 100% sure, but it's originally from a Cobalt, and for the fill tube, and I'll have those connect, and that'll eventually go into the other port on the manifold for the intercooler for the ZL1 Lid. So that's the basics of the intercooler and the hoses. I still need to mount the pump. I still need to, as you can see, I still need to do the pulley. I was going to do that tonight, but the intercooler just came in and I wanted to get it mounted. And also, it looks like this line is touching, but I bent the bracket. It's not. There's a good 1/8 of an inch clearance on there. So this thing's pretty mounted, pretty solid. It's not going to go anywhere. So like I said, you know, mounting this, it was pretty much direct bolt on. Trimming some plastic, I don't mind doing that. What I cut the bumper support with, that was actually a combination of air tools and a jigsaw. I recommend the jigsaw, it goes by quicker. Okay guys, as you can see, I got the intercooler pump mounted. There's actually a threaded nut on it's welded to the subframe. There's one on both sides of the air grabber scoop right there. One on the passenger, one on the driver's. I decided, and I just went through my random selection of bolts, and I found a bolt that was the same thread and same thickness, and it screwed right into that nut. So that gave me a perfect mounting point for the intercooler. You see the black rubber and silver band. Well, that's like a kind of a fancy hose clamp that holds the intercooler pump in place. So what that allowed me to do was reroute the lower heat exchanger. So I have that lower heat exchanger hose going right into the what looks like the turbo inlet of a turbo. So it's this one right here, this line going in. That's going into the pump. Then the output is going, so then I have the nylon braided hose going up through the car, and that'll eventually end up on the bottom port of the heat exchanger. So that's the intercooler mounting position, and I'd highly recommend it. That's where you put yours as well. Oh, and I also ran the electrical for it, so I'm going to put the bumper back on, and it'll be done. The electrical is from Magnuson, and that harness, it's a mess. I need to get grounds and find an ignition source for it, but that will eventually be finished up. I'll do another video on that later. Okay guys, I just finished finalizing a few more things on the top of the motor. I swapped in the manifold absolute pressure sensor, the MAP sensor from the LS3 intake manifold. This is just a hole that we're not using, so I just grabbed the sensor off my stock manifold, put it over here, and plugged the hole. Then I tightened it down with a coil pack bracket bolt, like this threaded rod nut, and it's got more threads on top of it. I actually use that same bolt, the coil pack bracket bolts, for the fuel rail here, 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 and here. So 4 of the 5 fuel rail bolts are held down with that. I'm gonna have to get a different bolt for this front one, because that type bolt will run into the lid. So coil pack bracket bolts for all of those. Now I have mine actually left over from the Corvette from when I did the LSA valve cover mods on the Corvette, so I have extra GM bolts. I'm not sure the thread of them, but it's a fine thread. It's a 10mm bolt head, and it's the same thread for that sensor, for the fuel rails, and that's about it. Now, I did try to test fit the evap purge line that I had ordered for the for the ZL1. It's just not going to work on the SS because the Camaro has it somewhere down over here by almost like where the dipstick is, and that line's not going to work. So I'm going to order the CTS-V one, which I've seen works. I'm going to order that one on Monday, so that one will plug into the fuel rail. It comes around the driver's side and then kind of goes under the fuel rail and plugs in. So I'm going to order that. I think it's like some online for like $11, but you start getting it with shipping, with GM parts. Amazon unfortunately didn't have it, and eBay had it, but it was like, it's going to be like $15 and another $15 for shipping. So for something that's small, I'm going to call my local dealership and see what their price is. If they can't beat the price online, the cheapest price I found online was $19. So it's either going to be $19 or less. I'll let you know. But the CTS-V one will come in, and then the stock ZL1 that I ordered, I'm just going to throw that on eBay as a brand new GM part because literally haven't used it. So that's for the evap fuel purge solenoid. Did get the clips. There's these square shaped clips that go around the fuel injector. I'm not sure, you might be able to see that. There's these square clips that go around the injector and go around the fuel rail as well. It's like a security clip. I didn't install those, so I didn't even think about it, because when I did the Corvette install, literally came with an Edelbrock fuel rail, so you just plugged them in, pushed the fuel rail down, bolted it down, and you were good. So this is a little bit different setup. So okay guys, I got the radiator fans out, I got the bottom splash guard out, and I also got the crank pulley off. How I did this was, took the splash guard off by jacking up the car, and you can see the jack stands down there. I didn't want to do this on the lift because I was afraid I wasn't going to have enough room, you know, getting the car just the right height. So got under the car, took out, there's 4 13mm bolts, those are over behind me. There's 4 13mm bolts, and then there's like 8 of those T25 bolts, same as these on the bottom. Take all those out, and then on the side there are 3 T15 bolts, and these aren't the vertical ones. These are the horizontal ones that connect the fender, inner fender liner, this stuff, to the bottom splash guard. And once I did that, I was able to get access to the crank pulley, and just gives you, you know, getting, it took me like 10 minutes on my back to get all that stuff out, and it just gave me enough room to get under here and gave me even more space to do anything I need to do down here. So there is, the drain plug is on the passenger side of the radiator. You can drain it without having that splash guard in place, but I don't want to make a huge mess with like coolant spraying in behind the splash guard, running down, and then running down behind the oil pan. So I just took the whole thing off and went and got my Walmart bed storage device. What I use them for draining coolant. Put that under the car, put the hex head socket in the bottom of the drain, undid it, and I didn't let it, I just slowly let it drain, and I didn't, as you can see, there's not a ton of coolant in there. What I need to do, I just needed to drain the coolant enough to get the coolant level below the radiator hose. So I ended up just letting it drip, oh, you know, have a pretty steady stream. And then I disconnected the upper hose. There's a steam hose in here too. It's somewhere. Oh, it's hanging down here. Disconnected that as well, and that gave me enough room to pull the fans. There's an electrical connection right here for the fans. Just pull up on the fan, and what you're going to do is, because the AC condenser line's right here, pull it the passenger side up first and then pull it out, so that way you're gonna like fish it out underneath the AC condenser line, and you'll have enough room to pull it out. And with pulling that out, I had just enough room to get my impact in here and take the crank pulley bolt off. Now I had to sit on that for a good while before it would budge. Finally came off, and I grabbed the AutoZone small 3-jaw puller. I think the rental price was 30 bucks. Put the jaws around the edge of the pulley, and to make up the gap between the bolt here and the crank itself, I used a 3/8 to 1/2 inch adapter, and then I put a 1/2 inch socket on it like that. And I used a bigger socket, it's over in the car. So I use this to make up the gap between the crankshaft and the puller. And I put that way, you know, the threaded bolt didn't go into the crankshaft itself. And I used that. The first probably 20 turns I used by hand. And then I grabbed my 3/8 air ratchet. Air ratchet, put that on there, and it pulled it right off. Didn't gouge up the crank at all, and everything looks good. So that's how you get everything out of the way to get the crank pulley off. Okay guys, I got the LS3 crank pulley off. I got the LSA crank pulley installed. This install was actually very, very easy. I don't know, maybe it's just because the car only has 10,000 miles on it. When I did the Corvette, it just seemed to be, it'd take a lot longer to do, and it was a lot harder to get on. So the stock crank pulley came off with no issue. This one slid right on. Now I did put anti-seize on the inside of the crank pulley, so down here, and I also put it on the very end of the crankshaft itself, and that's just to help preventing from, you know, galling or seizing on the crank. I kind of just tapped it on a little bit just with my hands. I didn't use any tools or anything. I pressed it on a little bit. Then I grabbed my crank pulley install tool. I've used this probably used this like 3 or 4 times now with the Corvette. I replaced the crank pulley, put the supercharger on, put the cam in. Yeah, I mean, that's 3 or 4 times. My buddy used this on his LS swapped S10, and I'm using it again on the the supercharge install for the SS. So I mean, that's 5 or 6 uses out of this, and this thing was only like 20 bucks. I would say it's a pretty good investment. All it really is a nut, 2 washers, and some all thread. But basically how you use this is thread it into the very end of the crankshaft, and, you know, so that it bottoms out. Put your nut on there, and then just start tightening it, and this nut will tighten, because since it's already at the back of the crank, it's not going to spin anymore. It's just going to pull the nut toward the motor. So as you tighten it, it's going to push the crank pulley deeper, deeper, deeper onto the crankshaft, and until eventually it bottoms out. And you'll know when you're done is because you'll be able to thread this with just, I used a 3/8, I'm sorry, I used a 1/2 inch ratchet, and I think that's a 24 millimeter socket. I just tightened it until it bottomed out, and the crankshaft itself and the whole engine started turning. So that's when you know you're done. Now, you can measure, you can mic the depth of the crank pulley install. I know the Corvettes are supposed to be within a certain spec, but all I've done was just do the same thing, you know, tighten it all the way in, when it bottoms out, stop tightening it. Okay guys, I got the LSA crank pulley fully installed. What I ended up doing was putting a tire iron up in the torque converter through the inspection plate, and I was able to get it tight. So after it stopped moving, I grabbed my Lowe's like 5-foot long torque wrench. It's a 250 foot-pound 1/2 inch drive torque wrench. I used that. I torqued the stock bolt down to 240 foot-pounds, and then I grabbed my pin kit from Edelbrock. It is a, I'm not sure who makes it, who supplies it for Edelbrock, but it's a kit that's provided with their E-Force kit. And the drill was a little dull. I mean, not too dull, but the drill bit is a 15/64, and the flaring bit is a 1/4 inch, it's 0.25. So what I did was, after I put the stock bolt in, cranked it to 240 foot-pounds, I took that back out, I grabbed the pin kit, I installed the bolts in the hole, and then I used the 15/64 drill bit, drilled the hole 1.5 inches from the tip to the tape line, and that gets you about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch into the crank for the pin itself. And then I grabbed the flaring tool, I'm not sure what they call it. It's another bit that comes with the Edelbrock kit. I use that to hollow out the hole a little bit more. And guys, what we have here is a 1/4 inch cold rolled steel rod from Lowe's. Part number is 11593. It's in the metal section, the hardware section at Lowe's. It was 3 feet long, it's 1/4 inch diameter, and it's approximately, it's like $289 before tax, so probably $3 with tax. And what I'm going to do is I only need like 1/2 inch to 1/4 to 3/4 inch. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this down to 2 inches, and then I'll be able to, you know, stick it in the crank. I'm not sure. I may have to sand this end just a little bit, you know. I'm just not sure as of this point, because of the diameter. Should be around 1/4 inch, because that's what that flaring tool is. But, you know, I want to cut it down to a more manageable size, and then I can stick it in the car and see if it fits. Okay, so I just sanded it down a little bit with my belt sander, and I beveled the edge a little bit just because I don't want anything sharp going into the crank. Okay guys, that 1/4 inch diameter actually was 100% correct. I'm shocked. I didn't think that was gonna fit. So now what I need to figure out is going to be the depth that I need to cut that down to. Okay guys, so I'm measuring my tape measure with an approximation, and I'm going to cut where the very far end of this silver mark is. And like I guessed, I thought it was going to be between 1/2 inch and 3/4. That's like right there, right in the middle. So what I'm going to do is cut that down, and then I am going to sand it again and put it in the car. Alright, now let's use the belt sander again, clean this up. Okay guys, what I'm doing now is putting the ARP, I've already pinned the crank, cut the pin, I cut it down with my bandsaw, and then I sanded it down with my belt sander. So now I'm just checking to make sure that my ARP crank bolt's gonna work. This is part number 2342503. It's for pretty much all of the LS motors, except for maybe the LS9 and the LS7, because those have the crank pulleys are a little bit different because of the dry sumps. At least in the Corvette application. I couldn't honestly tell you about the Z28, the 5th gen Camaro Z28, because I just am not 100%. I'm actually gonna use my cell phone to shoot video, because last time I did this, it's almost impossible to see down there. So I think we're good, because it looks like the washer sits above the pin. Actually, that'll be a good shot. So what I'm gonna do next is actually take the bolt back out, and I'm going to need to use the chromoly lube, Ultra Torque. Actually, it's not chromoly, what's the makeup of the bolt? Okay guys, I put the ARP crank bolt in. I put the lubricant all over the bolt, before the washer, after the washer, under the head, bolt head. And that stuff's nasty. I wore a pair of rubber gloves, and that stuff's just, it's like the freaking anti-seize. It gets everywhere. So be prepared to have a mess. So I have the ARP crank bolt fully tightened down. I put the crank bolt in, fully lubed. Got it under the car, put the tire iron up through the torque converter, wedged it. The engine stopped spinning. Grabbed my massive Cobalt / Lowe's torque wrench, set it to 235 foot-pounds, put it on the socket, and crank this mother. This thing is, it's a lot of weight. I mean, I'm just over 200 pounds myself, and this pretty much required full use of my body. And the ARP bolt is a 27 millimeter 12-point socket. So I actually had to go buy this socket from Lowe's, because I didn't carry a socket size like that. And I used that on the Corvette when I supercharged it almost 2 years ago. So, won't be a one-time bolt use. I've used this a few times now. So now the ARP bolt is in, and the crank is finally done. So as you guys can see, I put on the air conditioner belt way on the bottom, and then one row closer to me is the main accessory drive belt. It's got the water pump, the tensioner, the alternator, and the crank pulley itself. That belt is on. And the reason I started with putting the belts on was because, from what I read, guys doing the swap, they actually had issues with getting the stock belts on after you put on all the LSA parts, which I guess I could see that with, if you had the pulley right here, these two big pulleys, you probably couldn't get the main accessory drive belt behind it. So, but got the belts on. Then I started with the idler bracket right here. Now, as you can see, I have the bolts in loosely. I haven't put any of the pulleys on. It's because I need to look up. I may be one bolt short. I'm not 100% sure, because The parts guys say you only need 3 bolts. However, the problem is there's 4 holes. There's 3 casts in the upper part of the water pump, and there's a 4th bolt down here in the bottom part of the water pump. I just don't know which bolts are supposed to go where. I looked at the parts diagrams on the various GM websites, and they only show 2 bolts for the idler bracket. So I'm not exactly sure. I'm going to have to do some more research on that. And then I moved on to the LSA tensioner bracket and then the tensioner itself. The tensioner bracket has 3 bolts in it, 1, 2, and 3. The bottom on the side, it goes in sideways into the water pump. Those I haven't torqued down all the way yet, but shorter bolt here and the other 2 bolts, this bolt here in the center and the bolt on the side are the same length. That was kind of a pain to get to because on the cylinder head on the stock configuration, there's a clip here with 2 grounds going to that same bolt plus the holder for the wire harness. So, you know, that zip tie right there, that's actually a giant zip tie. So it's kind of weird. So I had to disconnect I took the bolt out. It's a short 15mm bolt. Took that bolt out. I moved the grounds. I moved 1 ground here to the top bolt because it had plenty of reach. And then on the bottom is where I ran the 2nd ground. Now for that ground to reach, I had to cut. There was a zip tie connecting these 2 harnesses, this ground strap and this main harness. Not this zip tie, there was a second one further back here. I had to cut that, and that gave me enough room to get the 2 grounds. I cut that back there, then it gave me enough room to get those 2 grounds to get enough room to reach, enough length to reach where they need to go. Okay guys, as you can see, I finished the accessory drive bolts and belt, as well as the idler pulleys and all that. Now, I am missing 1 bolt for the very bottom of the idler bracket. It's this black bracket back here. I ordered it, should be here within a week or so, and I will eventually have to put that on. Now, to get to that bolt, all I have to do is loosen the tensioner, pull the belt away, pull this 15mm bolt, and then the bolt right there. It's right behind this pulley. Now, to finish up the bolts and pulleys and all this, all of the bolts are actually 37 foot-pounds. I found the GM Performance Parts LSA accessory drive, like the install instructions online, and all of the bolts that come with that kit are 37mm. So the tensioner, the 3 bolts for the tensioner bracket, the 2 here and the 1 on the side, and those 3 small bolts for the idler pulley bracket, those are all 37. And then I bolted all the pulleys on. Those are all 37 foot-pounds as well. Now, the 3 small bolts are only 10mm head size on the idler bracket. I did that very carefully because I thought, man, 37 foot-pounds for just a 10mm bolt head, that seemed really kind of high. But it's what the GM accessory torque specs called for. So I just did it in stages. You know, I tightened it, and did like 3 stages, and finally just 1 final turn and it clicked. Did that for all 3 bolts, nothing stripped, haven't had a problem. Now the other thing that I had to do was actually take the throttle body and loosen it up because the belt is within like 1/8 of an inch of the throttle body. So I had to take the throttle body, loosen it, push it forward toward the front of the car, slide the belt back in, and then retighten the bolts. So that's another thing you'll have to do. But other than that, the supercharger itself and the drive system, it's done. Thanks for watching my video. Don't forget to like it, and if you haven't already, please subscribe.